Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Game Tidicon video, we're going to be discussing the Scorpio yet again. It's the console we know least about. It is of course an upgraded model of the Xbox One, and we know some rudimentary specifications. For example, it most likely has 12GB of RAM, has 320GB per second of memory bandwidth. The most touted figure of all is 6 T-flops of GPU performance, and is sporting an 8-core processor. We've also discussed some leaks concerning the specifications. We'll go more into those again in just a moment. But other than that, we don't know a hell of a lot about how games are going to look, how they're going to play. So, Sony were very boastful when it came to the PlayStation 4 Pro. And I do think that it is definitely an upgrade over the original PS4, there's no doubt about that. But many folks have expressed a dissatisfaction on the performance of the machine because of either the upscaled 4K when it comes to gaming titles, the fact that it didn't have a 4K Blu-ray drive for, of course, movies, and overall, I think some folks were just expecting a little bit more performance out of the machine. Right or wrongly. Now, my personal opinion is the PS4 Pro is a pretty good console, and is absolutely phenomenal for those who haven't jumped on the PS4 bandwagon, but if you already own a PS4, it becomes a bit dicier. So, naturally, there is a lot of suspicion and questions regarding the Xbox Scorpio. I'm just going to refer to it as the Scorpio for the remainder of this video. Some developers have gone on record and said that it's essentially a fully fledged new generation. It's not like an incremental upgrade. It's not like, for lack of a better term with the PS4 Pro, it's not like a 4.5. It is a completely new version. So it's almost like having the fourth Xbox, because obviously you had the original Xbox, Xbox 360, Xbox One, so this would be the equivalent of the Xbox 4. Phil Spencer was asked on Twitter just recently, like, when will we be able to pre-order the Scorpio? He was asked this by a user by the name of KS38, and Phil has said something that actually surprised me, and quite a few other people. Wait until we show you games on it before you pre-order. And he also thanked the person for their interest. End quote. Now, do remember Phil, a couple of times before this, has said that he was very impressed with the Scorpio. He has said that, you know, he's actually seen the, I guess, beta hardware running, prototype hardware if you prefer, running beta Scorpio titles, and has said that he was incredibly impressed. Now, obviously, he does have somewhat of a vested interest in saying he's impressed, but the fact that he's actually telling people, yeah, okay, you know what? You wait. Don't pre-order the system. Go in with your expectations set to medium. Like, don't be negative to it, essentially, and don't be positive to it. Just don't pre-order it. And if you're impressed, then by all means pre-order it. Or, sorry, buy the system. That's actually a really good sign. Not just in the performance of the system, but also as Microsoft's attitude as a whole. Now, I don't necessarily prefer Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo. Honestly, I'm kind of like between all of them. I grew up predominantly playing Sega when I was younger. I mostly had like a Sega Master System, Genesis or Mega Drive if you prefer, the Saturn and everything else under the sun. I did own a PS1 later on. And along with the Sega machines, I also owned a bunch of other stuff like the 8-bit microcomputers such as the Spectrum. Do remember I was pretty young at the time. I was actually really young when I owned these systems and had been out for a couple of years already. Basically, my parents were buying them quite cheap as they were coming towards their end of life. So I had kind of a varied upbringing in terms of computing. And predominantly now I'm a PC gamer. But I do feel that Phil's comments are actually somewhat refreshing, and I'm hoping that we're going to see a system which is really powerful. The problem is, everyone just looks at the figure between the PS4 Pro, which is about 4.2 T-flops of performance, and the Scorpio, which is about 6 T-flops, and they say, well, gee, it's not that much more. I mean, yeah, it is more, but it's not the difference between, let's say, the PS4 and the PS4 Pro. There's obviously, in terms of raw T-flop numbers, there's more of a difference between the PS4 and PS4 Pro than what there is between the PS4 Pro and the Scorpio, if that made any sense to you. The difficulty with the Scorpio isn't necessarily the 6 T-flops versus 4.2, it's the architecture, the underlying technology which they're built upon. So the PS4 Pro, we know, has a basis primarily in in Polaris. So a lot of the technology is from Polaris, but it does also have a couple of Vega-based extensions. But the CPU is still Jaguar, running, albeit at a higher clock speed. It's running at 2.1 rather than 1.6 of the original PS4 or 1.75 of the Xbox One. And naturally, if we're talking about the Scorpio, it's even trickier because we just don't know what the GPU is. There have been some leaked white papers which have appeared online. I don't have the originals, and the originals have not been shared, at least to my knowledge. If anyone has those, feel free to reach out to me on the social media stuff which is linked in the video description. But honestly, from the tidbits that have been shared via social media and that I've seen, it appears that there is going to definitely be a 6 T-flop GPU, but that's not really surprising. It has about 4.5-ish times the raw floating point performance of the original Xbox, but the big deal is it has a considerably higher amount of level 2 cache, which does point to a completely different architecture, even if you include the fact that it does have those additional compute units. Unfortunately, details such as the number of CUs, the architecture of those CUs, and also other bits and pieces such as, the clock speed of the GPU, that's missing. And the reason that this is all important is because it tells us that if it's based on NCU rather than GCN, NCU, just for your FYI, is the next compute architecture from AMD. It's basically the Vega architecture exclusively. So if there is a lot of Vega which is going inside the Scorpio, and I feel that that's probably a good bet at this point, simply because the release dates of the Scorpio and Vega would coincide rather nicely together. But even if you take the GPU out of the equation, there are other questions, like, for example, what's the CPU inside of it? We do know, however, that the Scorpio is a lot more balanced than the predecessor. The Xbox One had some major issues with the ESRAM. I don't really want to bog the video down too much into the issues of the original Xbox One system or architecture, but not only did it have a fairly anemic amount of GPU performance, it had about 1.31, which wasn't quite enough. And the primary reason behind this, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, a significant amount of die space had been dedicated to the ESRAM on the actual system's APU, which was 32 megabytes of ESRAM, but also it had those move engines. And a lot of the reason behind this was cost-saving measures because of the DDR3, and obviously it had the Kinect bundled as well, so you had to have certain hardware technology to deal with that. Basically, it just meant that the actual system's performance suffered in turn. And it's not that the system was really bad. I mean, I think some people have this vision where the Xbox One is not capable at all, and that's certainly not the case. But it certainly was not as powerful as the original PS4. So I think Microsoft, in their infinite wisdom, have decided to scrap the ESRAM, which isn't surprising, because ultimately they're using GDDR5 with 320 gigabytes per second. That's more than sufficient, even if you include the fact that it has considerably higher GPU performance. We're most likely looking at a much more updated architecture, and I've already been through quite a lot of the Vega exclusive technology before, so I don't want to focus too much on that in terms of memory bandwidth saving. But essentially it means that with the data flying around, whizzing around the memory subsystem of the Scorpio, providing it is using Vega, or even if it is using Polaris, to be fair, it's going to be a lot more efficient moving that data around. So memory bandwidth, although it is only 320 gigabytes per second, it's the equivalent of being considerably higher if it was based upon an older architecture. Ultimately, my personal opinion of the Scorpio, it won't run all games at 4K, just because. But what I do feel is that it will have definitely an advantage over the PS4 Pro, just simply because it's more powerful, it's coming out more, at a later date, so of course it's going to be more powerful. But the big question is, it's like, okay, let's say you've got a game that's running at 1080p on both the PS4 Pro and the Scorpio. What's going to be the visual differences? And the reason I'm saying 1080p, native rather than 4Ks, because I don't want to talk about checkerboard, I don't want to talk about any of that stuff. I just want just a nice simple 1080p image, which we can all agree on. It's pretty industry standard for a number of years now. I mean, it's been industry standard on PC since like the mid-2000s. So, you know, who cares really? So what's going to be the visual differences? Are we going to see improvements in shadows, lighting? Is there going to be better textures? Is the CPU going to be fast enough to be able to make do with that? There have been some murmurs that the CPU isn't going to be quite up there. I'm hearing some reports of people who have got the official white papers say they don't believe it's a Jaguar. They believe at the very least it's a Puma with some architecture changes, possibly inspired by Ryzen, but we just don't know yet. My personal opinion, however, in all of this is that I really like Phil's comments. I 100% agree with them. And this is what I tell people all the time. Unless you absolutely know that you're going to play the game or the piece of hardware without any question in your mind, don't buy it. And I think with the Xbox One, I could understand you pre-ordering it because it's like, you know, it's a new Xbox, there's new games coming up, but with the same thing for the PS4. But when it's an upgrade, it's like, okay, if the same games are going to essentially be backwards compatible, wait a couple of weeks, see if it's worth your actual time, wait for the graphics comparisons, wait for user feedback. Same thing for games. I personally don't pre-order them, and if they're for personal use. If it's for the channel, I'll either pre-order them or get a review code, depending, and obviously if it's a review code, I'll disclaim it. For example, I pre-ordered Resident Evil 7, even though I'm not covering it for the channel. AIM is doing that, but I really wanted to play the game. I played the demo, I knew I liked it, I saw the footage, was like, yep, okay, this is for me. I've played all of the other Resident Evils apart from Resident Evil 6, which I kind of played, but yeah, you know, it's not really survival horror, so it wasn't really my interest. Anyway, I think you get the idea. So, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Sorry for being a bit rambly. I'm still suffering quite heavily with my sinuses and the last vestiges of the cold. There are a couple of things that have been delayed, simply because I'm moving at the moment, and a few other bits and pieces that happened I can't really discuss because they're NDA and disclaimers, so I can't deal with those. But there are some really cool stuff coming up on the channel, including I'm going to be giving my analysis of all we know about Ryzen and all we know about Vega. That's going to be coming up soon. I'm currently working on a GPU breakdown of how GPUs work. That's probably going to be a couple of part videos. I've already put out the basics of what the terminologies mean, so I want to go in more in depth. And there's going to be a lot of other cool stuff, so definitely stick with us. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Normal stuff, like, share, comment, subscribe, give me internet cookies. I'll appreciate it. Bye for now.